Dear friends, welcome to the Eastern Front channel. Today we are talking about the penal battalions and companies of the Red Army. To understand this issue, we turn to the memoir of a Soviet veteran who served in a penal company. Yefim Abelevich Holbrai served as the deputy commander of the 163rd Penal Company of the 51st Army. The veteran's memoir is especially valuable since he was the son of an enemy of the people. His father was shot in 1937. This is the third part of the interview. The link to the other parts will be in the description and also at the end of the video. The soldier was not always a silent grey beast sent to slaughter. But we, in the penal company, always tried to gain the trust of the soldiers and shared with them all the hardships. Did they capture Germans in the penal units or? You won't understand it now, but then, by the end of the war, the bitterness had reached the extreme limits. In the heat of the battle, even if the German raised his hands, we could shoot him, not on purpose. There were dozens of cases when we ran past and the same already surrendered enemy picked up a machine gun from the ground and shot at the back of the attackers. And if a German crawled out of the trench with his hands up after the battle, then his chances of survival were quite high. And if 20 more comrades surrendered with him, as a rule, no one would touch them. But again, an example. The company continues the battle. There are about 20 of us left, and we need to carry out the task further. We captured 8 Germans. Where can I get 2 or 3 extra soldiers for escorting? Hundreds of captured Romanians were sent to the rear without a convoy. But there were Germans, and the company commander gives the order, shoot them. A fighter with a light machine gun shoots the Germans. Everyone is silent. In a minute we go on the attack. What the Germans did on our land cannot be forgiven. How many times we have seen the bodies of our children turned to pieces, who fell into the hands of the Germans. In East Prussia, the Germans knocked out a neighboring rifle regiment from the village and captured our medical battalion, located in a 2-story building. Our company was thrown to the rescue of the infantry, but we couldn't break through. Tanks blocked the approaches to the village and shot us at point-blank range. We retreated to the high rise and saw through binoculars how the Germans were throwing our wounded out of the windows and burning them alive. What kind of prisoners can we talk about after that? The penalty soldiers took them relatively rarely. This is a fact. Many families were killed, homes were destroyed, people took revenge. And what reaction should I expect? SS-men, tankmen and Vlasovites were often killed on the spot. We had soldiers who had passed the German camps. After all the horrors they had experienced, all the words of the deputies about humanity were an empty sound for them. Another terrible episode. In 1943, in the summer, our rifle battalion went on the attack. They took the village head-on, went for machine guns. After the battle, there were very few lucky ones left alive. The company commander was sitting on the ground and bleeding. Piece of shrapnel tore off his lower jaw. 5 captured Germans were left down. The fighter asks, "Where are they going?" Company officer took a notebook out of his field bag, tore out a piece of paper and wrote on it in blood, "Kill." But there was a case there in East Prussia which still haunts me. Our defense was crossed by a man without a weapon, in worn civilian clothes. He didn't have any documents with him. Maybe he escaped from the camp and made his way home. Unfortunately, he didn't understand a word of either Russian or German. We called the Lithuanian the same thing, and he talked and talked, trying to explain something at least. Most likely it was a Latvian or an Estonian. But no one knew either Latvian or Estonian. The easiest way was to send him to a higher headquarters, but it was necessary to send an escort with him. Shooting is easier. As the great leader used to say, if there is no person, there is no problem. I tried to prevent the massacre, but others looked at me with a bewilderment. Also cursed. Repeatedly, when I tried to stop the shooting, my comrades told me, "Why do you feel sorry for them? They have completely exterminated your nation." It hurts me to remember all this. There were strict orders forbidding reprisals against captured German. In many divisions they were strictly observed. I have seen a lot of penal guards convicted of such reprisals. The same Romanians had to be guarded from the heroes of the second echelon. On the way to the camp, they liked to shoot at unarmed people. The Germans always knew who was on the front line in front of them. If they knew that there were penalty soldiers in front of them, then they fought with us more steadfastly and fiercely. All these stories that the Germans were scary when they saw an attacking penalty company have no basis. The Germans didn't give a damn who was attacking them. Psychologically, it was probably hard for the Germans to fight against the penal officer battalions. The desire of the penal battalion members to atone for their sins before the motherland was too great, but the Germans fought intelligently, skillfully and bravely, no matter how hard it to admit it. How were the penalty soldiers who were not injured in the battles released? Did the tribunal sit to decide on their release from punishment, or did someone else consider their cases? The company commander had the right to cancel the punishment for heroism even to those fighters who had now expired the period of stay in the company specified in the sentence. But in fact, it happened like this. After several operations, we have about 24 fighters left. They are not wounded, but they participated in the battles, and we are justifiably transferring them to the neighboring rifle regiment. All stamped papers are filled in on the spot and issued to the soldiers. Only the list of redeemed and manifested, signed by the commander, goes to the headquarters. The soldiers hand over their weapons, and hello again, Red Army. They will receive weapons in their new units. No tribunal meetings or consultations with a special officer. We didn't fight until the last soldier. Further, those who remained alive from the permanent staff returned to the Army Reserve Regiment in anticipation of the next echelon with a criminal replenishment. They bring convicts, we sign the act of an acceptance. Then we march to the location of the company. The penalty soldiers received weapons directly from us. They received uniforms, were distributed to platoons. No one went to the rear to recruit the penalty soldiers. Did the national composition of the penal companies differ from the ordinary rifle companies? Mostly we had Slavs. There were practically no Jews among the soldiers of the penal company. During my 8 months in the company, which is a very long time in the war, only one Jew came across, and I was immediately called to look at him. It was a tailor from the Baltic states, and he didn't look dejected or unhappy. Jews have a highly developed sense of duty. If they got into the penalty company, it was only by accident or for some trifle. Well, the anti-Semitic commander could put in the penalty company, and this has happened. Among the officers of my company, there were 3 Ukrainians and 4 Russians, but the next penal company was commanded by a Jew, Levko Korsunsky. Arriving at a quiet moment to visit us, he took off a gorgeous Swiss watch from his left hand and threw it to the left, and took off his right and threw it to the right. It was a gesture. It's difficult to explain to a modern person. The watch was the object of constant lust and often sought as a reward. Not knowing a word of German, our soldiers quickly learned to pronounce "Wie viel ist die Uhr?" The unsuspecting German willingly took out a pocket watch, and they immediately migrated to the pocket of the victorious warrior. After the war, I searched for my comrades for a long time, but without success. How did their fate turn out? Are they alive? Did you ever met with any of the former penal guards of your company after the war? After the victory, I served in Ventspils for a while. One morning, a group of sailors came across. I must say that relations with the sailors were not easy and not always peaceful. One of the sailors suddenly rushed to me and began to strangle me. In view of the numerical superiority, it was useless to resist. It remained only to wait obediently for our own fate. 4 other sailors stood aside and smiled for some reason. Before I realized that my precious life, especially after the war, was not in danger, my new carefully adjusted shoulder straps were hopelessly crumpled. It was our former penal officer, now the commander of the Sea Hunter, who served a fine by injury or by time, I can't remember. There was no longer any need to talk about freedom of movement. I was taken and our picturesque group, I in green, the rest in black, dragged me to the pier. The ships were on the other side of the river. One of the sailors stood on a bench and began waving his arms. I understand the flag signal alphabet. They noticed something from the ship, wrote something in response, quickly lowered the boat, and soon we all found ourselves near the table, which was already set with food and drinks. The rest is vaguely remembered. Were there any cases of violence or looting of civilians in your penal company? My company was ending the war in the Baltic states, and then this land was already conceded Soviet territory, and the Lithuanians and Latvians were already Soviet citizens. For this reason, our thug company behaved relatively decently. According to the law of wartime, for banditry provided for execution on the spot, everyone wanted to live. But there was one shameful incident that tarnished our company. At the very end of the war, our penal officer, a Georgian by the name of Miladze, raped several women in the farms closest to the company's location. He was caught after 9 May, and instead of a well-deserved capital punishment, he received only 8 years in prison. On my opinion, it was necessary to put him against the wall. Dear friends, that's all for today. If you like this video, please leave your comments and press likes, and I will make other episodes about the penal battalions. It was Tim, see you.